alongside.
Oh, yeah.
And what about this evening, tonight?
Oh, tonight is full of fun. I know that LJY Netzer is running one of their classic Gangerschlaf. Gangerschlaf is a game show where everyone's in teams. I'm excited to see how that works on Zoom. Maybe we'll all be in our household teams, and all sorts of silly things happen. Oh my gosh, the things I've eaten in Gangerschlaf in the food challenges. I wonder what they're going to go make us find.
Well, last year, Baroness Merrin, as she is now, was really the star of Gangerschlaft last year. So I'm if you're watching, I'm hoping that she'll revisit her Gangerschlaft moments with us this year. And there's other LJY programming happening, LJY Netzer programming happening through the day. And I can see Owen is also with us. Owen, who's our co-chair of one of our co-chairs of Biennial Committee. Owen, is there something you're really looking forward to today?
Well, very much, pretty much everything. But I do think we've hit the ground running this morning with the start of the training. It's been absolutely superb. And I've no doubt it will really inspire us to take on social action and really address the problem of racism. And just really put, as I'm always saying, inclusion into action.
Thank you, Owen. And I think that we are ready to go into our next session. So I don't know whether you or Anna want to introduce our next speaker, although to most of us, she needs no introduction.
She certainly doesn't. So we hand over to Ellie.
Hi, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. It's lovely to be with you. We're going to be talking today about triangulating Judaism, or thinking in threes. Now, I've been consumed for a long time about binaries. And if you think about it, we actually almost exclusively focus on binary Judaism. We've got sacred, profane. We think about work and rest, male and female. And of course, beyond the Jewish world, you know, good and evil. There's so much that we're thinking that goes on in binaries. And what do binaries do? Binaries force us into oppositional thinking. We split things, we divide things that absolutely have no connection with one another. You're either for us or against us, it's us or them. Binaries are very fruitless, very non-constructive. What do we learn from binaries? We learn fear, we learn distrust, we learn hatred. Okay, so what about the Jewish point of view of that in terms of our foundational narratives? Well, they're full of binaries as well. We have Adam, human beings, split into Adam and Eve, their children, Cain and Abel, not just two children, but Cain kills Abel. Next, we have Isaac and Ishmael split apart, the two sons of Abraham, and even more unbelievable and bewildering, twins in the womb, Jacob and Esau, that are driven so far apart. Jacob, Israel, Esau, Edom, the redness, seen as an absolutely other nation, later on interpreted by the rabbis as Rome. The enemy, the ultimate enemy, Rome and Jerusalem, two oppositional cultures, totally oppositional. So that's a massive, crushing inheritance. And we reflect it every day of our lives. Who meets a baby and doesn't say, is it a boy or a girl? And in fact, doesn't know how to relate to the baby unless they know it's a boy or a girl. And as soon as they hear the information, it's a boy. Oh, look at those strong legs. He could be a footballer one day. And it's go, oh, she's really pretty. You know, we know it. We know the story. But actually, there's another story. And that story is a thinking in threes. And we also find it's interesting. And I'm not going to speculate about why we don't focus as much on this. There are lots of ways we could think, but let's just look at that. Let's just now start looking for the threes in the Torah. Well, first of all, there are two creation narratives. And the second one, which begins at Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, is not this hierarchical, ordered creation with humanity at the pinnacle that then has domination over the whole of creation. We have vegetation. We have the human being formed out of the dust of the ground, Adam from Adamah. We then have the Adam, the human being, the single human being, put in a garden to look after it, to be a gardener, to be a guardian, to do something that's really about having a relationship with the earth, and then needing companionship. In the first story, male and female, absolute split, totally opposite terms, because reproduction is necessary. But in the second story, we see something completely different. Why? There's an existential dimension. It's not good for the human to be alone. The human needs a companion. And so we get, in that context, the animals, and the human immediately sees the animals and names them. And as soon as the human names the animal, they're no longer suitable companionship material, because to name is to exert power. And then finally, in a deep sleep, the human is divided in two, not a rib. The tsela is the side of the human, and we get two. And what's interesting about the two, Ish and Isha, yes, they are man and woman, but they actually are based on the same root, to be human, Aleph Nun Shin. So there is a shared humanity, and the division is actually for companionship, which leads us all the way down the centuries to Buber's I and Thou. So it's a very different. So we've got that threefold presentation of what it is to be human and have a relationship with the planet, with the creatures, with the earth. But then we've also got the threefold presentation. Let's look at it, the threefold presentation of our people. We have three generations of our people. Abraham and Sarah. We have Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah and Zilpah. Three generations. We then have three sibling leaders of the Exodus. We have three forms of religious leadership later on: priests, prophets, scribes who become rabbis. Most interestingly, we've got three names for our people, and it's interesting that we don't explore this enough. Yisrael, coming from that amazing story of Jacob's nighttime encounter with the unknown man, where he gets a new name. He becomes Yisrael, one who struggles with God. So Israel, for God strugglers, a spiritual dimension to our peoplehood. We've got Ivrim, Hebrews. Jonah, when asked by the sailors, who are you, says, Anochi Ivri, I'm a Hebrew. What does it mean to be a Hebrew? It's the root Ein Beit Resh, to pass over, to cross over. We are forever crossing borders, an existential dimension to Jewish existence. And finally, the most common word, Yehudim, Jews, coming from that biological descent, specifically Jacob and Leah's fourth child, Yehudah. We are the biological descendants. So we've got these three dimensions of being a people: a spiritual dimension, an existential dimension, and a biological dimension. And to think only of one of these, we lose that complex combination. And so an inclusive way of thinking about being Jewish is about somehow holding all of these together. And obviously different people will relate to different aspects of that, but they are there in our inheritance. We've also got, very importantly, three loci of Jewish existence in our foundational narrative. If you think about it, you often say, well, I can hear some speaking in the background. If you could go on mute, that would be great. We've got a foundational narrative which doesn't just take us from Egypt to the land, but Egypt, wilderness land. In fact, the wilderness is the place where we are formed as a people, where we stand at Mount Sinai, where we wander for 40 years and try to find out who we are, this rabble of ex-slaves who eventually are not fit actually to cross over and have a new challenge, who find themselves dying in the wilderness. That freedom isn't enough. Freedom from, but what are we going to be free to do? And in the wilderness, that's where we make those discoveries. So those three elements, so important. And then very interestingly for our own lives, we actually find, if we look at the biblical calendar in Emor, which is our parashah for this week, we find the biblical calendar, and actually if we look at it, we have two cycles of three. We have the cycle of three that we're most familiar with, the Shalosh Regalim, the pilgrim festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. But we've actually got another cycle of three. We've got the cycle of three that comes in the 7th month, where we have the first day of the 7th month, the 10th day of the 7th month, and then the 15th day, Sukkot, concluding with Shmini Atzeret, this 8th day of closure. And what's interesting about that is that we have an intersection of two sets of three, because we've got the pilgrim festivals, as I mentioned, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, and then we've got Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret coming up in this second sort of triad. And what's interesting about Sukkot is it's so sophisticated that Sukkot draws out all the kind of implicit meanings and explicit meanings of that journey from the 1st to the 10th day, the sense of eternity beyond us, of what it is to actually experience renewal. And we do it concretely by building a sukkah that is fragile and is open to the elements, by shaking a lulav, not only in the directions of the compass, but towards heaven and towards earth. So somehow Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, encapsulates what that period of that 7th month is all about. So without maybe being conscious of it, we are living continually in these cycles of these cycles of 3. And here we are living in through this. And what I suppose I want to do this morning is get us to think more about what that means. What are the implications? Well, for me, if we go back to the sort of simple binary, the oppositional culture, the us, them, it's not this, it's that sort of sense of dividing the world in things that have no relation to one another. It's the minute you bring things in relation in these threes, you see complexity, you enable multiplicity, you have a sense that all these elements interact. And if we had more time, and I'll be exploring this more in my book, Triangulating Judaism, you can see the ways in which all these different elements impact dynamically on one another, are always in movement and engagement. And so let's come to the actual thinking in threes. So we've seen that there are lots of threes. So let's start thinking in threes. Well, what's very interesting is that obviously Jewish teaching is not just preoccupied with binaries. We've got a very important three that stares us in the face the minute we start looking at the Torah, and that is God, Torah, Israel. Now, when we say God, Torah, Israel, that's an obvious three, but what is the Torah doing there? What is the relationship between God and a people, any people? A relationship is, how is it created? How we are absolutely clear that God is utterly other, unreachable, ineffable, totally elusive, beyond us. And yet, the God that is totally elusive, beyond us, actually absolutely other than us, we enter into a relationship with that God. How do we do it? We do it through Torah. And what does that mean we do it through Torah? Do we just do it by, well, we've got a book and it's got things in it, mainly rules and regulations. And somehow we relate to God by reading those rules and regulations, and we relate to God by having services. It's not just something flat like that. The Torah is neither the word of God, which is the traditional way of thinking about it, nor is it the word of human beings, men, and I use that word advisedly because it was men who wrote it originally over time, which is a text critical way of looking at it. The Torah is a foundational expression of an ongoing conversation between God and the people that encompasses many texts and multiple voices. And those voices include our voices. Every time we study our Jewish texts, we engage and we enlarge that conversation. So we are constantly involved in that incredibly dynamic triad by engaging in Torah. And I want to allow time for discussion. So I'm going to go on to something that's quite a specific way of thinking about what I'm talking about. And that's two rabbinic texts, both in Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot are the chapters of the sages, the sort of wisdom book that's appended to the Mishnah, which was redacted around the year 200, the first rabbinic code of law. But Pirkei Avot is not a code of law, it's wise sayings. And we've got two amazing statements in Pirkei Avot, right at the beginning in the first chapter, which literally present the world as standing on three pillars. And I'm sure one of them is incredibly familiar to you. We even sing it as a song, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omeid. Simeon the Righteous was one of the last survivors of the Great Assembly. He used to say the world stands on three things: al ha-Torah, on Torah, va'al ha'avodah, and on divine worship, va'al gimulut chasadim, and on loving deeds. And that's at the second paragraph of that first chapter of Pirkei Avot. And then the 18th paragraph says, Rabban Simeon ben Gamliel used to say, the world stands on three things: al hadin, on justice, va'al ha'emet, on truth, va'al ha'shalom, and on peace. So we've got these amazing statements, both expressed in terms of three, saying something very fundamental. The world stands on these things, but we've got two sets of them. And when we think of two sets of three, well, a three we could think of as a triangle. Let's think of them as an equilateral triangle. And what happens when we put two equilateral triangles together? What do we get when we put two equilateral triangles together? We get a Magen David. But what's interesting about these two dimensions, it's not that we just have two sets of three and they make six. If we look at them more closely, and let's go back to that first one, the world stands on Torah, on Avodah, divine worship, and on Gimilut Chasadim, on loving deeds. In a way, that encapsulates Jewish life in its particular sense, our engagement as Jews with the Torah, our sense that the way in which we respond is by acknowledging God and engaging in divine worship in temple times with sacrifice after the temple was destroyed through prayer. And then Gimilut Chasadim, our loving acts, the way in which we relate and treat one another and are guided in our lives, our communal lives, to be Jews in a community. So we've got those three elements. But then let's look at the second passage again. The world stands on three things: al hadin, on justice, emet, truth, and on shalom, peace. Now these elements, although they're fundamental to a Jewish way of life, that's encapsulating everything that's important, are actually not restricted. They have a universal sense to them. System of justice, the importance of truth, the importance of peace. These are universal elements. So when we're looking at these two triangles, we're actually seeing an intersection in our Magen David of the particular concerns of Jewish life and also of the universal concerns. And that's another split that I really always irritates me, is when, people say, well, either, being Jewish is about doing everything Jewish in the community and just being engaged with the community, or being Jewish is going out in the world and doing social justice. We know as liberal Jews in particular, but all Jews know this, that it's an intersection. We only have to look at the structure of our liturgy. When we get to the call to prayer, the Baruch Hu, we actually confront the theology of Judaism. We're praying, but actually we've been given a lesson in theology. And that lesson begins with God as the creator. And it then presents to us God as the one who revealed the divine presence to the people and created this covenant relationship, which is mediated by love. And then we have the blessing after the Shema, which is about liberation. So we already have within our core texts and that we express of our theology in the service, we have this intersection of the universal, God as creator, and as that very particular sense of our covenant with God that we trace back, that we see in our foundational Sinai narrative. It's all there. So I'd like us to now to think about this, and this is where I'd like to engage you. Do these teachings, these particular teachings I've outlined here that we find in Pirkei Avot, do they encompass our understanding of the essential dimensions of Jewish life as liberal Jews? Do they encompass it? And are they encompassing enough to express our commitment to expanding the tent of Jewish life? And before we talk about it, I'd like to give you a little exercise to do. Now, if we were in Orthodox context, I couldn't give you this exercise to do. And then some of you may feel that you don't want to do this, and it's quite fine. I'm only going to give you a few minutes, 5 minutes to do it. But I'd like you as individuals to actually get a piece of paper and a pencil. Pencils are always good. I love pencils, with rubbers preferably, because you can rub things out. I love the fact that in our high-tech culture, pencils are still really important and essential. And I want you to think about, what are the three most important aspects of the Jewish story, of Jewish teachings for your Jewish life? And what are the three most important aspects of liberal Judaism for your Jewish life? So it's the three most important aspects of the Jewish story, of Jewish teachings in general for your Jewish life, and the three most important aspects of liberal Judaism for your Jewish life. And I want you to discreetly do those as two triangles. And of course, you've got choices as you do your triangles, between what's pointing up and what's pointing down, and whether that's significant, where you place your elements on the triangle. And once you've created them and put them together as a Magen David, what are the six elements? Where are the six elements located? And what, if anything, would you put in the center of your Magen David? What is the core? Because after all, I've talked about threes, but of course, the other number we could be talking about is 7, one of my favorite numbers. And of course, 2 3s plus 1 equals 7. And what would you put it? What would be your 7th element? What would you put at the heart of your Magen David? And then, if you want to take it a little bit further, think of the 6 points of the Magen David as tent pegs. Imagine putting up a tent, each of the points as a tent peg, and ask yourself, who are you including in your Magen David tent? So I've given you quite a few things to do, but obviously interpret it exactly as you like. I think you've got the idea. We're looking at 2 triangles, one of them of the kind of essential Jewish and general elements, one the essential liberal, and this is for you. This is not an objective exercise, it's a subjective exercise for you, putting them together, where you'd locate them, what you might put in the center, and then thinking, translating that Magen David into a tent with its tent pegs and who you're going to include. So I know that we're online and everything, and pausing is always a problem. Anybody who doesn't want to do this exercise can ask me a question, that's fine. But I would love it if people would do this exercise. I've done it myself a few times. It always changes, of course. And if you do it, please put a date on it and put it away, and then look at it again in a year's time, or maybe at the next biennial, and see if the things you put down would be different in the future, because of course we're always changing. So we're going to do that now for 5 minutes, and anybody who wants to ask me a question doesn't want to do that, that's absolutely fine. Okay, I've got a question coming up. So Sharon's asking, where's that? You said that the Torah is the intermediary in the relationship between God and Jews. I thought direct prayer did that job. Can you comment, please? I'll be doing the exercise. It's a fascinating idea. Yeah, what I'm saying, it's not so much the Torah as an intermediary. It's that the Torah is the conversation. And yes, prayer is another conversation, but Torah is in a sense, the foundational conversation. And it's interesting that we can put different emphases in our life. And one of the emphases that I might put is when you think of, that's another thing we could talk about, what's a synagogue? It's a Beit Midrash, it's a Beit Tefillah, it's a Beit Knesset, it's a house of study, it's a house of prayer, it's a house of meeting. People put the emphasis in different ways. So probably in my life, connecting all the things that on my journey, I'd probably put the Torah as the conversation, the engagement with Torah as the conversation between the people and God. But other people might put the emphasis on prayer as that element in that conversation. But both are true. It's not that it's one or the other. It's about emphasis and where we locate ourselves. I've got a question here. Would you mind sharing your pegs? Hold on. I'm not quite sure I get the question. Hold on. Would I mind sharing my pegs? I'm one of the least practical people you ever meet. So get me to put up a tent, forget it. I won't be able to put up a tent. But it's just a thought that we would think of the sort of the corners of our Magen David as the places where we might put a peg in the ground and create out of this Magen David a tent. I don't know if that answers your question. So we got Victoria asking, what are your corners? Well, everybody's corners are going to be different, aren't they? That's the thing. We're doing this exercise, and hopefully people will share. So got a couple more minutes, and then I'll ask people to share if they'd like to. Okay, so the question is actually from Victoria, that she's interested in what mine are. Well, mine are always changing, so that they are never the same. But I suppose, no, I don't want to say what mine are yet. I might say what mine are at the end. I think that would be too leading, as I'm in the kind of privileged position of being the person leading this session. So I'm going to hold off on that. I'm more interested in hearing what other people have to say. Okay, we're going to start coming back together. So I'm going to see if I can do gallery view so I can see everybody. Well, I won't see everybody because there are a lot of people here, but I'll see some people. Obviously the screen is limited to our 20 faces, and I can see that there are 4 screens. So it's going to be difficult. But if you do want to ask a question, I think you'll be spotlighted, or it will immediately show me who you are. So any thoughts, questions, and anybody wanting to share what they've done, the triangles and the Magen David. I'm going to flick between screens. It's very difficult. I think, Kathy wants to say something. Can you unmute yourself, Kathy?
Yes, just happy to share. It's an interesting exercise. So from the triangle from the Torah would be community, protection, and responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And from liberal Judaism would be tolerance, kindness, and responsibility. And the bit in the middle would be love.
Okay, thank you. That's lovely. Would you repeat it again so that we take it in, everybody can take it in?
And actually, I found it quite surprising what my answers were. It's interesting that, not having ever thought about it before, to find that actually what they specifically meant was perhaps different from what I would have expected. But community, protection, and responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And liberal Judaism, tolerance, kindness, and responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And you've got love in the center. Thank you. Would anybody else like to share what they have? And again, I'm going to try flicking through the screens and seeing if anybody has.
Can I share, Rabbi Elli?
Okay, so hold on. Who's talking?
Sharon.
Sharon.
My hand is up.
Yeah, Sharon. I can't see you at the moment. Okay, Sharon. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I had from traditional Judaism, I think I must have done it slightly different. Love thy neighbor as thyself, rest on Shabbat, and connection to the Creator.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the liberal Judaism on top, action to make all equal, community help, and connection to everyone. and I actually had love in the middle myself.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon. And again, I'm going to be flicking through to see if I can see. It might be better if you unmute yourself and say something. That will help me, because it's very difficult to see.
I could share mine. It's Ruth.
Okay, Ruth. Hi, Ruth.
Hi. So I had, for traditional Judaism, or I had Yom Kippur, which I find a great festival. Yom Hazeh, the importance of what we do in this world and today, and the history, the connection, the great heritage. From liberal Judaism, unsurprisingly, perhaps, I've got inclusion. The fact that we need to think about what we do, to have a reason for everything, which is exhausting but good, and that I can understand it because it's in English. The middle of mine is Shalom Bayit. It's the peace that I get.
Thank you, Ruth. And you express that peace you get as Shalom Bayit specifically, so peace of the house.
Yes, but it's also sort of, the peace of the house, the peace of the synagogue. When I still need to go, but I can't. But when sometimes I really, really need to go to synagogue, for that peace. And I've missed it, so it's kind of noted it, how important that seems to be the centre of all of those. But it's that particular piece. That's I call it. Is that the wrong name? The sort of the piece of the.
No, that's Shalom Bayit. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you. Thanks very much. Is anybody else? It's all very interesting. Look at the variety. Jeffrey wants to. I can see Jeffrey's hand up because it's on this screen. If you're on the screen, this particular screen, I keep flitting between screens.
I'll say what I've got. I haven't got an equatorial triangle. I've got one with a hypotenuse, which I
right, okay, fair enough.
So for the Jewish elements, I've got festivals and Jewish history on two sides, and for the longer side, the hypotenuse, got lots of loving kindness. That's been the most important. And on the liberal Jews, I've got a sense of community, personal identity. And on the hypotenuse, I've got making the world a better place.
Great.
Straight like in David, but
I like that. I like the fact that you decided to put emphasis. So that's really interesting. And absolutely, you can change the shape of a triangle. That's really interesting. Did you put anything in the middle, Jeff?
Well, I suppose in the middle, I found that hard, but in the middle I put Nottingham Liberal Synagogue.
Well, very lovely. That's great.
Ellie?
Anybody else? Yes. Oh, hi, Margaret. Rabbi Margaret Jacobi. Hi.
Hi. I'm realising what a classical liberal here and what a rabbi I am, because my
You've got your go on. You're on mute. Yeah.
So I was saying I'm realising what a classical liberal Jew and what a rabbi I am. My Jewish triangle is perhaps rather predictable, but I would still hold by it. That's creation, Sinai, and Exodus, and everything that stems from those three. And my classical liberal triangle is justice, sincerity in prayer, and continual reevaluation. And at the centre, I've put God, however you define God.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I must say, obviously we are rabbis, so my I have to admit now, I'm going to be honest about it, that my three are that triangle of three around the Shema as well. My first three are very similar to Margaret's. Thank you, Margaret. Anybody else? And again, I'm sort of flicking through. Owen. Hi, Owen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My three, I'm going to be a little bit awkward.
Okay.
And explain. I've got the same in both triangles. I've got literally life, light, action in Jewish, and in liberal Jewish, life, light, action, and in the middle, Torah.
Right, sorry. So you've got the same things for both triangles?
That's it, yes.
So that's interesting. Okay, do you want to say why?
That was just my natural response, spontaneous response. I wasn't able to differentiate immediately. I may do later, but for now, that's
great.
my deal.
No, that's great. Thank you. And of course, in a way, you know, Torah gives you both those dimensions, the universal, the particular, the way in which you engage in your own life as a liberal Jew and your sense of being a Jew. So that, great, makes a lot of sense. Again, I'm sort of looking for anybody by flicking through. Might be a good idea to unmute and say something, because as I say, there are lots of...
I'll take that up as an invitation. It's Gillian here.
Hold on. So I've got now 2 people talking. So the first person I heard was Gillian. Where's Gillian?
Okay, I'm here.
Okay. So I think I was Gillian, then I think there was Myrna, and then there was Sarah. Okay, so, and I've got 3. So Gillian first.
Okay, well, I had to say, I'm so glad Owen said that he put the same things, because I didn't put completely the same things, but I found that what was important to me about my Judaism is also important about my liberal Judaism. So I'm glad Owen led the way in thinking that way. So my most important for Jewish teachings is Tikkun Olam, and the sense of community, which lots of people expressed in different ways. Sorry, that I've got that on the wrong one. Tikkun Olam and prayer and caring for people is my Jewish teachings. Mm-hmm. My liberal Jewish most important aspects are Tikkun Olam and community, and putting high-minded aspirations into practice. I would say I've learned a lot about liberal Judaism leading from the center in things like gay marriage and being outspoken about injustice. I've over the years I've been incredibly impressed about how you actually tackle issues in the world by being there. And my centre said to Tikkun Olam, which
so you a double emphasis on Tikkun Olam there.
Not a triple, really. We're talking in 3s here.
So you had it on both triangles. That's right, 3s.
So
Tikkun Olam times 3. Fantastic.
But I'm glad you asked us to do it individually first, because hearing everybody else's made me think, oh yes, that's important. Oh yes, that's important.
It's very important. Thank you for mentioning that, actually, Gillian, because for me, we have to begin with the individual. You know, we come into this world and we have to find a way of negotiating ourselves in relation to others from the beginning, from being babies. I mean, that's a very hard struggle. And we know I have to begin with myself, but not end with myself, you know. And so thank you for saying that. It's really, really important. I think the next person was Myrna. So I've got Myrna, Sarah and Phyllis.
Mine were, the traditional ones were history, identity and mitzvot, putting things into practice. Mm-hmm. And the liberal Judaism ones were community, introspection and Tikkun Olam. And the one in the center was Torah.
Torah, thank you. So you've got 2 Torahs in the center. Thank you very much, Myrna. That's great. And Sarah was the next person.
Hi. My traditional Judaism ones are learning, justice and structure. That sort of feeling of regularity and
I'm going into the thing now. Is that right?
Self-discipline. And the liberal Judaism ones, the one right at the top that so many have mentioned is Tikkun Olam. And then either side, we've got inclusivity, and then I cheated and put and individual, because you're right, that's a part of that is very much, I feel very much more recognized by liberal congregations. And joy on the other side. There's often a joyous feeling that I didn't feel in my United Synagogue upbringing. And then in the middle is spiritual, which, you know, you can find in all places, but yeah.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. That's great. And Phyllis also had a hand up.
So my Judaism side triangle has in tradition, history, structure, and Torah, in particularly 10 Commandments and everything else by which we live. And my liberal side, I've got inclusivity, tolerance, and spirituality. In fact, I really want 4 because I want community as well. And in the middle, I've got God and love. But the really interesting thing I realized when I was doing this is that my appreciation of the, tradition, we've got an interesting picture. My appreciation of Judaism grew immensely when we found liberal Judaism. Having grown up in an Orthodox background, I really didn't have that appreciation that I've got now.
Thank you very much. Any more people would like to share? We're getting, I mean, they're interesting things where they're similar things, but they're also interesting differences, and certainly differences in approach and emphasis. Anybody else like to share what they have? And again, I'm looking, but it might help if you say.
Hello, Rabbi Elli, this is Shannon.
Hi, Shannon. Hi.
I don't want to put my camera on because I'm still in my pajamas.
That's all right. Lots of people have got their cameras off. They're all in their pajamas as well. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So I couldn't put my 6 points into just one word. So let me just go over what I said, which is so the 3. I literally did stories at first. So the overarching Jewish stories, like the burning bush story, where Jacob is struggling with God essentially, and that sort of renewal of spirit is very important as to why I engage with Judaism. The story of the Exodus, but also the exiles, very important to my life, because we've had to travel here, there, and everywhere throughout our life. And then Shabbat, of course, is super important to our lives. And then the 3 most important liberal Judaism points, the mixed faith marriage blessings. So inclusivity, that's welcomed me into Judaism, social justice, and let me see, going down, oops, can't see. And then like the center was like my relationship with God and this directive to choose life. So I couldn't choose which one. The directive to choose life is very important to me, and something I have to remember over and over again, something to do.
I mean, it's really important that we don't, I'm not trying to be prescriptive here. And you might say, we don't want to make it like a rigid thing. So it's fine for you to be bursting out of these 2 sets of 3s. And what's important, you've mentioned stories, because stories are terribly important. And that's another aspect of what would motivate me, would be in terms of stories. And I think the burning bush and Jacob would certainly be 2 of them. But there are so many amazing stories when we explore them. And of course, we've got our own story as well, which is so important. I think Victoria's got a technological hand up. Victoria, did you want to say something?
Okay, number 1 is, God, or rather struggle with faith, study, and history as locus of identity. And number 2, J, is community, inclusion, and service. And the one in the middle is meaning.
Yeah, now that's interesting, because of course meaning is the way we negotiate all the elements, is by creating meaning in our lives. And I'm going to see if any more people, before we actually look at this whole idea of the tent. So does anybody else like to yes, I can see Claire. Now I'm skipping through screens and I can see Claire waving a hand.
I'm sorry, I couldn't actually do the original 6 points because I didn't hear the instructions. I'm really sorry, and I've missed quite a lot of what people have said. It sounds absolutely brilliant idea. Thank you. I'll have to use it. I just wondered whether anybody has mentioned family, as I hear quite a lot of people moving over from United Synagogue or Orthodoxy to liberal Judaism, and I wonder if anybody has mentioned family connection in the
Well, they haven't yet, but you have. So the exercise is the exercise of two triangles, one with the three most essential, generally Jewish.
I get that.
Yeah. And the other one was to do with the liberal Judaism, but you're the first one to mention family.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that's interesting in itself.
And also, I know a few years ago, I don't know where it probably would have gone in the center, actually, would be some kind of a sort of politicized Judaism in the context of Israel and Palestine, because that was so important.
Mm-hmm. And that's another interesting thing, that you're the first person to mention Israel, the place, and that's also an interesting one. And one of the things that comes through this, of course, is how we are all individuals negotiating, and, you know, Viktoria put it in the center of hers, but we're all negotiating meaning all the time. That's what we're doing. Is anybody else? And I'm trying to not lose people. Oh, Nick, I see your hand is up. Hello, Nick.
Hi. Yeah, so actually following on from Claire and linking in a bit to Owen, the way I did it was I've actually put on opposite sides of the Magen David, sort of like complementary things. So for Judaism, I've put down questioning, and then liberal Judaism, I've put down ability to disagree with orthodoxy. For Judaism, I've got history and provenance, and then liberal Judaism is sort of relevance today, sort of the modern dynamic bit. And then I've actually put down family as well. So for Judaism, I actually put, if you like, traditional family, and then for liberal Judaism is the liberal Judaism family. So, you know, I've got them opposite. And I didn't know what to put in the middle. I'm still thinking about that. So I must admit, when I first started doing this, or when you first explained it, I thought I went into work mode. I said, you know, this is the sort of thing you do at work. And I thought, oh, you know, one of these things, I'd better do something just to play along. And actually, as I did it, I thought, well, this is quite interesting. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And that's just about engaging ourselves in something that's meaningful and connecting. And that's also very fundamental to me about what it is to teach, because to teach is to learn and to engage, and should not be in any way just one way. That what we do is we're engaging together and we're learning and we're contributing our wisdom to the wisdom that's gone before, as Rami Shapiro puts it in his wonderful poem. I'm just looking to see if anybody has got a hand up. If you haven't, I can hear some background. Noise, but I can't see a hand up at the moment. Okay, looks like there isn't. So I'm wondering if we could think a bit, because we've had some wonderful contributions, and even if you didn't speak, please don't think, oh, well, the session's over, I'll just forget that and throw it away. I mean, I'm a terrible hoarder, so, but I'm not suggesting you hoard it. I'm just suggesting that it would be really useful for you to return to this as a way of marking your own journey and your own thinking. And it's something I do on a regular basis. In fact, I've always started my Exploring Judaism courses when we're looking at what is Judaism with this kind of exercise. And I said, keep it and look at it in a year's time and see where you are on your journey. So I'm just suggesting you do that. It'd be a way of remembering this wonderful conference, is just date it and return to it. But I'm interested in this whole idea of the tent of the pegs, imagining now that this Magen David, and we had that wonderful example of the, you know, extended, it doesn't have to be two equilateral triangles, but just imagine that we were now transforming this Magen David into something with the 6 points. We had pegs and they were pegging and creating a tent. And I'm just thinking about who we are really including, because obviously there are lots and lots of dimensions to our inheritance and to our current engagement as liberal Jews. But as we think about all these elements, how are we enabling? Because for me, the fundamental question to ask is, do I as an individual feel that I am at home and can be included here? And what do I have to do what has to happen to do that? What has to take place? Because in thinking in threes, what we're thinking about is these complex interactions. We know the basic unit of Jewish learning is chavruta, so it's two people together, but actually it's never only two. Because what two people are doing when they sit down together and engage Jewishly is they're engaging with this Jewish thing between them that is part of who they are as individuals, and is also part of what this little seed of community. Two people engaging together over a text is a seed of community. So how do we do that? How do we take all these elements and actually create something complex? Because at the basic thought is the two creates opposition, it creates division. The minute you start going from 2 to 3, you create something that's more complex, that allows for multiplicity, all the different ways you can interact, and obviously you build up from there. And the further you go along that, the more elements you include. I'm sure one of my reasons I'm so obsessed with threes is because I'm the middle child of 3, but I'm not going to bore you with that experience. Some of us will have been in that position, but I'm just really interested about the who now, because we've considered the elements that we would have. How do we actually create this tent that allows for multiple voices, for multiplicity? Because inclusion for me is not about, well, we join something and we find a way of fitting in. Inclusion is, how do we bring all the diverse thing of who we are in all our amazing, glorious complexity as individuals? How do we bring that in without leaving anything out? How do we do that and find a way of being together and allowing our voices to speak? Any thoughts? And I'm going to go again onto gallery view so I can see people.
I think we have a hand up from Janet.
Sorry, I couldn't see Janet. Where's Janet?
Janet, if you're able to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Yes, I was listening very interestingly to the two triangles, and one of the things that I didn't hear, and which I think is linked to what you're talking about possibly now, Rabbi Elli, is the world Jewish family. I personally, that brings insights, and I do feel that I have different the word's not personality, sorry, I'm having a senior moment at the moment, but it's I belong to different communities, and one of them is the world Jewish family. When you travel, when you live abroad, as I have done, you know, you've got a family locally, i.e. your Jewish family, which you go out and seek, or I have gone out and sought and shared Pesach in different communities, gone to local shores. It's opened my eyes, and that's where your diversity comes in, and your understanding of different traditions, different foods, what the idea of Jewish food is. I remember going to a Moroccan Jewish wedding.
Yes, it says right. Yes, I'm still in that room, yes.
Many years ago, and with a non-Jewish friend in a rabbi's house on a Shabbat, and I was asked by my non-Jewish friend, what is this food? And so I asked the rabbi, because it was different from a Shabbat morning lunch for me, and he sort of looked at me in surprise and says, don't you know, don't you have this at home? And I said, no, we don't. And that opened my eyes in my early 20s, and since then I've taken much more interest, and it's added fascinating and very warm feelings as one goes around the world and then brings it into your own home, into your own experience.
Thank you, Janet. I think that's very important. Obviously, there's so many cultural differences. When we talk about that we're all Jews and all do the same, clearly we don't look at the difference between what's okay on Pesach, depending on whether you're Sephardi or Ashkenazi, for example. Lovely thought. Any other thoughts? I'm going to go back to gallery view, try and see if anybody else got something they'd like to say. And if you missed out on saying something about your Magen David earlier and you'd like to say it now, that's also fine. Would you like to? Oh yes, I can now see Mike. I can see Mike. Where's Mike gone? Do you want to unmute yourself? think, Mike, you had your hand up. No, you're still muted. Okay. Hello? No. Okay. Would anybody else like to say something? Prue, is that Prue's hand up? Hi, Prue. Would you like to unmute? No, maybe Prue's hand up.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Prue.
One of my corners was storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're talking about two people discussing, storytelling mediates or allows the opportunity to mediate in a safe place. And I think that can be really, really important. And certainly in the biblical, your traditional triangle, language and storytelling was one of my key points. I won't bother with the others, but
don't bother. What were your others?
Okay, well, the traditional triangle was responsibility, the ethical thrust of the Torah. Storytelling and language was my top one, and an occasional shock of truth in language. And then my liberal one was Edmund Flagg's comment that Judaism demands of me no abdication of the mind. And then the other 2 points were community, sort of tikkun olam, and social actions rolled into one. And liberal Judaism leading on issues which somebody else mentioned, which I thought was really important. But it was the idea that the binary structure can be broken down by storytelling, I think is a useful one.
Thank you. And I think actually, Prue, I mean, thank you so much for coming in at that point, because I think that's a wonderful way to end.
It was a good session, by the way.
Thank you very much, because actually communication, sharing, trying to find a common language by which we can talk together can break down difference. That when we talk about conflict, we're talking about people who are not sharing the same story. They have different narratives. How do they find a way of having a conversation between those narratives? And that all of us in that position. So thank you so much, Prue. That was a brilliant way of completing this session. And thank you, everybody, for your contributions. And please, as I say, do hang on to your Magen Davids, or if you didn't do it now, think about doing it another time. So many thanks and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
It's been a brilliant session, hasn't it, Anna?
It has. Oh, it's been fabulous.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I've just logged on. What was it about the Magen David?
Well, there's so much more to come in the sessions today, and you'll have to be filled in upon in one of the chat sessions, I'm afraid, because it's shortly time for our Shabbat morning service. Owen, I'll let you introduce it.
Yes, I think for many of us, the Shabbat morning service is probably one of the most important